I watched my own mother look the judge dead in the eye and swear she only wanted what was best for my children. But she didn't know I had her phone records. She didn't know the entire courtroom was about to hear exactly why she threw my 7-year-old out like trash. My name is Claire. For as long as I can remember, I have been a disappointment to my parents, Charles and Evelyn Harrington. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, I was taught early on that love in our household was entirely conditional. It was based on appearances, on quiet obedience, and on fitting into the pristine country club image my mother had spent her life cultivating. I didn't fit that image. I was opinionated. I hated the suffocating social events, and most unforgivably, I married a mechanic instead of the investment banker my father had handpicked for me. When my marriage fell apart 5 years later, leaving me as a single mother to 2 young girls, my parents didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. They offered a self-satisfied, I told you so. I was determined to raise my daughters without their strings attached, working double shifts as a medical receptionist and scraping by in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. My daughters were the center of my universe, but they couldn't have been more different. Harper, my 7-year-old, was a quiet, observant child with dark brown hair and my own hazel eyes. She was a miniature version of me, and because of that, my parents always kept her at arm's length. Then there was Mia, 3 years old, with striking blonde ringlets, bright blue eyes, and an extroverted, bubbly personality. Mia was the spitting image of my mother, Evelyn, in her youth. The favoritism was glaring from the moment Mia was born. At holidays, Mia received lavish, personalized gifts, designer dresses, expensive wooden toys, while Harper would receive a generic book or a cheap puzzle. I fought with them constantly over this, but they always gaslit me, claiming I was being overly sensitive and jealous. Our precarious independence shattered last October. I contracted a severe respiratory infection that developed into pneumonia. I was hospitalized for a week, lost my job because I couldn't make my shifts, and the medical bills buried me. Within 2 months, I was facing eviction. I had no savings, no partner to lean on, and the terrifying reality of homelessness looming over my daughters' heads. I made the most agonizing decision of my life. I called my parents for help. My mother's voice on the phone was dangerously sweet, dripping with the vindication she had waited years to feel. They proposed a lifeline. They would take Harper and Mia to live with them at their sprawling estate. The girls would have stability, a backyard, and a warm bed. Meanwhile, my parents would pay for a small, single-room studio for me in the city for 6 months, allowing me to recover, find a new job, and get back on my feet. "We just want what's best for our granddaughters, Claire," my father, Charles, said during our meeting in his mahogany-paneled study. "But to do this properly, to get Mia on our premium health insurance, and to enroll Harper in the prestigious elementary school down the road, you need to sign a temporary guardianship agreement. It's just a formality, a piece of paper." I hesitated. My stomach tied itself into knots. But looking at my exhausted daughters, and knowing I had literally 3 days before the sheriff locked us out of our apartment, I signed the papers. I thought I was doing the selfless thing. I thought I was being a good mother. For the first month, I visited every single weekend. I took the train up on Friday nights and stayed until Sunday, but the atmosphere was toxic. The disparity in how my daughters were treated had amplified 1,000 times. Mia was given the grand guest room, newly painted pink, overflowing with new toys. Harper was placed in the small, drafty room above the garage. When I confronted my mother, she waved me off. "Harper likes her privacy, Claire. Stop creating drama." But Harper was becoming a ghost. She stopped speaking at the dinner table. She walked on eggshells. One Sunday, I caught my mother aggressively scrubbing a small scuff mark off the kitchen floor, screaming at Harper for dragging her shoes, calling her a clumsy, ungrateful burden. I intervened, screaming back at my mother, and packed my bags to leave early. I promised Harper that I just needed a little more time, a few more paychecks, and I would take them both back. I didn't get a few more paychecks. I got 3 days. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my tiny studio apartment, drafting cover letters, when a heavy knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Gordon, my father's private driver, standing in the dim hallway. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Standing next to him, clutching a garbage bag full of her clothes and a small backpack, was my 7-year-old daughter. Harper's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes swollen shut from crying. "I'm sorry, Miss Claire," Gordon mumbled, looking at the floor. "Mr. Harrington told me to drop her off," he said. "He said I wasn't to bring her back." My heart stopped. I dropped to my knees and pulled Harper into my arms, feeling her tiny body shake with uncontrollable sobs. I looked up at Gordon in absolute shock. "Where is Mia? Why is Harper here?" "They only gave me Harper," he whispered, quickly turning and walking down the hall as if he couldn't bear to be a part of it a second longer. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a voicemail from my mother. My hands shook violently as I pressed play. Evelyn's voice echoed through my empty apartment, cold, measured, and utterly devoid of humanity. "Claire, Harper is simply too disruptive. She is sullen, she is uncooperative, and quite frankly, she doesn't fit into our lifestyle. We are sending her back to you. We have decided to keep Mia. She is thriving here, and she belongs with us. Do not come to the house. The gates will be locked." They hadn't taken my children in to help me. They had taken them in to go shopping for the one they wanted, and they had discarded the other. For a long time, the only sound in the studio apartment was Harper's ragged breathing. I held her against my chest, rocking her back and forth on the cheap linoleum floor, trying to absorb the magnitude of my parents' cruelty. My 7-year-old daughter had been packed into a town car, like a defective piece of merchandise, and shipped back to the slums. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" Harper whispered, her voice hoarse. Grandma said I ruined the aesthetic. Rage, a blinding, white-hot, terrifying rage ignited in my chest. "No, baby," I choked out, kissing her forehead fiercely. "You did nothing wrong. Your grandmother is sick." I put Harper in my bed, turned on a cartoon to distract her, and walked into the bathroom. I dialed my parents' home line. It went straight to voicemail. I called my mother's cell. Voicemail. Finally, I called my father's private cell phone. He picked up on the third ring. "Claire, stop calling," Charles said, his voice dripping with aristocratic boredom. "Bring Mia back right now," I hissed, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "Bring her back, or I swear to God I am calling the police and telling them you kidnapped my daughter." My father let out a dry, patronizing chuckle. "You signed a temporary guardianship agreement, Claire. It grants us full physical and legal custody until a judge says otherwise. The police won't touch this. It's a civil matter. Besides, what are you going to do? You live in a 200-square-foot box. You have no job. You have no money. If you try to fight us, we will drag you through the courts until you are utterly destroyed. We will prove you are unfit, and we will take both of them permanently. Count yourself lucky we let you keep the one that acts just like you." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a hornet. He was right about one thing. I called the local police precinct, and the desk sergeant told me exactly what my father predicted. Because I had voluntarily signed the guardianship forms, it was a custody dispute. I would have to file a petition in family court. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours scouring the internet for pro bono legal aid, desperate single mother resources, anyone who could help. The next morning, I took the last $400 I had to my name and walked into the dingy, strip mall office of Jessica Cole. Jessica was a hardened family law attorney who looked like she ran on black coffee and sheer spite. She listened to my story in silence, reviewing the guardianship agreement I had signed. "Your parents are smart, and they are vicious," Jessica said, leaning back in her creaky leather chair. "This document gives them total authority. To get it revoked, we can't just say you changed your mind. We have to prove to a judge that staying in that house is actively detrimental to Mia's well-being, or that they obtained your signature through fraud and malicious intent. And, Claire, I'll be honest with you. Your parents have millions. They will hire sharks who will paint you as a broke, unstable mother who abandoned her kids." "I didn't abandon them. They manipulated me," I cried, burying my face in my hands. "I believe you," Jessica said softly. "But the court needs proof. We need evidence of their intent. We need a smoking gun." I went home, defeated. How was I supposed to get evidence? I was locked out of their estate. I had no witnesses other than a 7-year-old child, and no judge was going to put Harper on the stand if my parents' lawyers could help it. That evening, I was unpacking Harper's garbage bag of clothes to wash them. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a sweater, was a sleek silver iPad. I frowned, pulling it out. "Harper, what is this?" Harper looked up from her coloring book. Grandpa gave it to me on the day you left. He said if I stayed in my room and didn't bother anyone, I could play games on it. Gordon said I should take it with me. I turned the device on. It wasn't a new iPad. The lock screen was a picture of my parents' prized sailboat. It was my father's old iPad. My pulse quickened. Charles Harrington was a genius at making money, but he was famously incompetent with technology. He constantly forgot passwords and just bought new devices rather than figure out how to reset his old ones. I swiped the screen. No passcode. It opened directly to the home screen. My hands began to shake as I noticed the green messages icon. It had a little red bubble on it. Since it was an Apple device, if my father hadn't logged out of his Apple ID, which I knew for a fact he wouldn't know how to do, every single text message sent from his iPhone would mirror perfectly onto this iPad. I tapped the icon. The screen populated with a long list of text threads. My breath caught in my throat. Right at the top was a thread with my mother, Evelyn. The timestamp showed they had been messaging each other just hours before they sent Harper away. I clicked on their thread and began to scroll back. Back to the week before. Back to the month before. Back to the very day I had called them from my hospital bed, begging for help. What I read didn't just turn my stomach. It froze the blood in my veins. It was a cold, premeditated conspiracy, typed out in stark black and white. Evelyn. She's desperate. The hospital just called her for billing. Now is the time. Charles. You're sure about this? Taking both of them? Evelyn. We only have to tolerate the older one temporarily. If we ask for just Mia, Claire will get suspicious and say no. We take them both, get the signature, and once the paperwork is locked in, we can discard Harper. She's exactly like Claire anyway, sullen and ungrateful. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. I kept scrolling. The messages got worse. Charles. Harper has been crying all morning. It's giving me a migraine. Evelyn. Tell her to shut up. If she steps out of that garage room again, lock the door. I refuse to have her ruining our Sunday dinner with her pathetic moping. Charles. How much longer until we dump her? Evelyn. I'm talking to the lawyers tomorrow. As soon as the guardianship is airtight for Mia, put Harper in the car and send her back to the slums where she belongs. I am not letting Claire ruin Mia the way she ruined herself. Tears of pure fury spilled down my cheeks. They had planned this. Every single moment of my misery, every tear Harper had shed, was a calculated move on a chessboard, so my mother could have a do-over child. I didn't sleep a wink. At 8 a.m. sharp the next morning, I walked into Jessica Cole's office and slammed the iPad onto her desk. You said we needed a smoking gun? I said, my voice eerily calm. I brought you a bazooka. Jessica stared at the iPad screen for a full 5 minutes, the only sound in her cramped office the rhythmic clicking of her fingernails against her desk. Her jaw tightened with every swipe of her finger. When she finally looked up at me, the hardened, cynical exterior had completely vanished, replaced by a fierce, predatory gleam. I have been practicing family law for 15 years, Jessica said, her voice dropping an octave. I have seen spouses hide money. I have seen parents lie about substance abuse. But the sheer, sociopathic calculation in these messages, this isn't just a smoking gun, Claire. This is a guillotine. And we are going to drop it on their necks. Within 24 hours, Jessica had filed an emergency ex parte motion to revoke the temporary guardianship, citing severe emotional abuse and fraudulent inducement. Because of the explosive nature of the evidence we submitted under seal, the clerk fast-tracked our hearing. 3 days later, I was walking up the sprawling granite steps of the county courthouse. My stomach was churning so violently I thought I might faint. I was wearing a cheap, borrowed navy blazer that didn't quite fit, clutching my purse like a lifeline. When we entered courtroom 4B, my parents were already there. My mother, Evelyn, looked like she was attending a charity luncheon. She wore a pristine powder blue Chanel suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her posture rigidly elegant. My father, Charles, sat beside her in a bespoke charcoal pinstripe suit, exuding an aura of untouchable wealth. Next to them sat their attorney, Preston Caldwell, a man who looked exactly as expensive as he was, with a condescending smirk permanently etched onto his face. When Evelyn saw me, she didn't look angry. She looked amused. She leaned over and whispered something to my father, and they both let out a quiet, synchronized scoff. They thought this was a joke. They thought I was a pathetic, broke woman throwing a desperate tantrum. They had no idea about the iPad. We had kept the specific nature of our evidence under seal until the hearing to prevent them from attempting to suppress it. Judge Patricia Sullivan, a stern-faced woman with piercing gray eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense, took the bench. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the files before her. "We are here on an emergency motion to revoke a temporary guardianship agreement," Judge Sullivan announced, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. "Mr. Caldwell, your clients currently have physical and legal custody of the minor child, Mia. The older child, Harper, was voluntarily returned to the mother. Is that correct?" Preston Caldwell stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. And frankly, we are baffled as to why we are wasting the court's valuable time. My client stepped in to save their granddaughters from a life of profound instability. My client's daughter, Claire, is unemployed, recently evicted, and living in a single-room studio apartment that is entirely unfit for children. My clients graciously took on the financial and emotional burden of these girls. They returned the older child, Harper, simply because she was acting out and missing her mother. It was a kindness. Now, Claire is attempting to disrupt Mia's stable environment purely out of spite. I dug my nails into my palms so hard they bled. I wanted to scream, but Jessica put a firm hand on my knee, keeping me anchored. "Miss Cole," Judge Sullivan said, turning her sharp gaze to our table, "your motion alleges fraud and emotional abuse. Those are heavy accusations against grandparents who, on paper, appear to be providing significant financial support. What exactly is your argument here?" Jessica stood slowly. She didn't have the flashy charisma of Preston Caldwell, but she commanded the room with a quiet, lethal authority. "Your Honor, the guardianship agreement was signed under false pretenses," Jessica began. "Charles and Evelyn Harrington did not take these children in to help a struggling mother. They orchestrated a calculated scheme to legally kidnap the younger child, Mia, who fits their aesthetic preferences, while intentionally discarding the older child, Harper, whom they deemed a burden. And we have the precise, documented timeline of this conspiracy." Jessica walked over to the bailiff and handed him the silver iPad, along with a stack of printed, authenticated transcripts. "Exhibit A, Your Honor, the respondent's personal Apple device, which was carelessly handed to the 7-year-old child as a toy before she was banished from their home. It contains an unfiltered, unsynced iMessage thread between Charles and Evelyn Harrington. Across the aisle, I saw my father's face drain of all color. He stared at the silver tablet in the bailiff's hands, his eyes widening in sudden, unadulterated panic. He patted his jacket pockets, the realization dawning on him that his old iPad had never been wiped. Evelyn's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of horrified confusion. Judge Sullivan took the printed transcripts. The courtroom was dead silent, save for the rustle of the thick paper as she turned the first page. For a long, agonizing minute, the judge simply read. I watched the color rise in Judge Sullivan's cheeks. Her jaw clenched. The air in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. When she finally looked up, the fury in her eyes was terrifying. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Sullivan said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Have you reviewed this evidence?" No, Your Honor. We were not made aware of any electronic communications," Caldwell stammered, entirely thrown off guard by the sudden shift in the judge's demeanor. "Let me enlighten you," Judge Sullivan snapped, holding up the papers. "I am looking at a message from your client, Evelyn Harrington, dated October 14th. It reads, 'If we ask for just Mia, Claire will get suspicious. We take them both, get the signature, and once the paperwork is locked in, we can discard Harper.' And here is another from Charles Harrington. 'How much longer until we dump her?'" Evelyn gasped out loud. "That is out of context. Those are private messages," she shrieked, entirely abandoning her country club poise. "Silence!" Judge Sullivan roared, slamming her gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "You will not speak in my courtroom unless spoken to, Mrs. Harrington." The judge turned her blistering gaze back to my parents. "In my 22 years on the bench, I have dealt with addicts, abusers, and criminals, but I have rarely encountered this level of sheer, malignant narcissism. You did not offer a lifeline. You executed a predatory shopping spree for a human child, treating a 7-year-old girl like a defective accessory you could return to the store." My father stood up, his face red and sweating. Your Honor, be reasonable. Look at her finances. She lives in poverty. We can offer Mia the world. You cannot offer that child anything of value, Mr. Harrington, because you are entirely bankrupt of basic human decency, the judge fired back. She didn't even let Caldwell interject. The trap my parents had spent months building had just snapped shut on their own fingers. Judge Sullivan didn't even call for a recess. She delivered her ruling right there from the bench, and her words struck my parents like physical blows. The temporary guardianship agreement is hereby declared null and void, revoked immediately with prejudice, on the grounds of fraudulent inducement, Judge Sullivan declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. Legal and physical custody of Mia Harrington is restored to her mother, Claire, effective this exact second. Preston Caldwell practically jumped out of his expensive shoes. Your Honor, please, the logistics of a sudden transition. The logistics are none of your concern, Mr. Caldwell, the judge interrupted sharply. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order. Charles and Evelyn Harrington are not to come within 500 feet of Claire, Harper, or Mia. You are barred from their schools, their residence, and you are forbidden from attempting to contact them by any means. Evelyn was hyperventilating, clutching her Chanel purse against her chest as if she was having a heart attack. You can't do this. She's my granddaughter. Mia belongs in our house. If you violate this order, Mrs. Harrington, you will belong in a county jail cell, Judge Sullivan warned, her eyes narrowing. She then turned her attention to me, and the anger on her face softened into something resembling deep, profound pity. Claire, a sheriff's deputy will escort you to the Harrington estate immediately to retrieve your daughter. You are free to go. I burst into tears. Jessica hugged me tightly, her tough exterior finally cracking into a genuine, triumphant smile. We had done it. We had slain the dragons. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of a black and white county sheriff's cruiser, pulling up to the towering wrought iron gates of my parents' estate. The deputy, a burly man named Miller, who had been briefed on the judge's ruling, flashed his lights, forcing the groundskeeper to open the gates. We drove up the winding, manicured driveway. Before the cruiser even came to a complete stop, the massive oak front doors burst open. My parents had rushed home from the courthouse. Evelyn stood on the front steps, her face twisted in a mask of feral desperation. I stepped out of the car, my legs trembling, but the deputy walked ahead of me, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Mrs. Harrington, Deputy Miller said, his voice loud and authoritative. I have a court order signed by Judge Sullivan. We are here to collect the child, Mia, and her belongings. You need to step aside. No, Evelyn screamed, physically blocking the doorway. She's taking her to a slum. She's ruining her life. Charles, do something. My father stood in the foyer, looking completely defeated. The arrogant billionaire had been stripped of his power, realizing for the first time in his life that his money couldn't buy his way out of a judge's direct order. Let them in, Evelyn, he muttered, his voice hollow. It's over. I pushed past my mother. I didn't even look at her. I sprinted up the grand, sweeping staircase and down the long hallway toward the pink guest room. I threw the door open. Mia was sitting on a plush rug, playing with a set of wooden blocks. When she saw me, her bright blue eyes widened, and a massive, toothy smile spread across her face. Mommy, she squealed, dropping the blocks and running toward me on her chubby little legs. I fell to my knees and scooped her into my arms, burying my face in her blonde curls, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. I've got you, baby, I choked out. I've got you. We're going home. We're going to see Harper. At the sound of Harper's name, Mia cheered. We packed her things in under 10 minutes. As I walked out the front door, holding Mia tightly against my hip, Evelyn was standing on the lawn, weeping hysterically. Claire, please, my mother begged, reaching out a trembling hand. Please don't take her away from me. We can make a deal. I'll pay for your apartment. I'll give you whatever you want. I stopped and looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had treated my firstborn child like a piece of garbage. I felt nothing but a cold, heavy emptiness where my love for her used to be. You already gave me everything I needed, Mother, I said coldly. You gave me the iPad. I turned my back on them, climbed into the sheriff's cruiser, and never looked back. The aftermath of that day changed our lives forever. Jessica wasn't just a good family lawyer. She was a shark. Armed with the judge's findings of fraudulent inducement and the documented emotional abuse of Harper, Jessica filed a massive civil lawsuit against my parents, fearing the public relations nightmare of a drawn-out trial that would expose their abhorrent behavior to their country club friends. My father settled out of court. The settlement was life-changing. It was enough to buy a beautiful, modest, three-bedroom house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, far away from Connecticut. It was enough to set up college funds for both of my girls, and enough to give me the breathing room to go back to school and get my nursing degree. It has been 2 years since I last saw Charles and Evelyn Harrington. Harper is 9 now, and her light has fully returned. She laughs loudly, she leaves her toys out, and she knows without a shadow of a doubt that she is loved fiercely, exactly as she is. Mia is 5, still bubbly and bright, but growing up in a home where her worth isn't tied to how much she resembles a ghost from the past. We are a family. We are safe. We are together. And we are free from the trap of their conditional love. And whenever I doubt my own strength, I just look at my daughters, knowing I fought a war to keep them, and I won. Family is supposed to be our safe haven, but sometimes the people who share our blood are the ones we need the most protection from. This journey taught me that a mother's love is stronger than any manipulation, and the truth always leaves a digital footprint. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to fight for their kids, and subscribe for more real-life stories of surviving and thriving against the odds. See you in the next one.